This place is just my home. Lovely to see all of you again. And it's just so great to be thinking about how long it has taken us, how long the journey has been. Starting from domestic residences, moving to Firth Park. My enduring memory of Firth Park is how often the caretaker will come down and be driving us out when he thinks it's time for us to close. Moving to Coroner's Court and all the challenges. 1 minute landlord says that, next minute landlord says that, next minute he wants to sell, next minute he's changing his mind. Even coming to find this place, when it looked as if all was lost. I mean, the landlord at Coroner's Park was kicking us out and looks like all was lost. One time, Bishop driving past sees this place, comes in here, and God begins to work at another different level of miracles. The Lord has been good. The Lord has been faithful. It has been 14 years. It has not been easy. It has had its challenges. But in all of this, the Lord has been good. And we thank him for his goodness. Yes. So at this time, after all the praise and worship and all the high spiritual things, let's take a step back. Let's have a story time. Who likes stories? Yeah, let's take a step back. Let's have a story time. Because one of the enduring memories I have of our childhood was when in the evenings, the lights would be off, and we would sit outside, sometimes with those small Chinese lanterns, and the elders among us would tell us stories. They taught us lots of lessons. We learned a lot from those stories. And in fact, I still say to this day that one of the reasons why we have issues with corruption as a nation is because of the Anansi stories we were told when we were young. Because in all of those stories, Kweku Anansi was always the hero, and he was a fraudster, he was a thief, he was a trickster, he was corrupt, and yet he was always a hero. So I honestly believe that somewhere at a deep level, our subconscious was tuned that in every movement you have to be like Kweku Anansi. And when you see the history of our nation, you see the life of some of our leaders, you look at them and you realize, actually, this is just like the Kweku Anansi story we used to hear. But this evening, we want to tell a different story. We want to tell a very interesting story about a power, a unique and interesting power, a power that was absolute, that existed before the beginning of time. And this was an interesting power, because this power then undertook certain steps that we'll see more of as we go along the way. But looking at this power and the way the power used to operate, trying to relate it into a story form, I find that the best analogy I can draw is by using that of a car battery. You know the batteries that run our cars? I just find that there's characteristics of a car battery that is very, very similar to this power. Now, earlier on, I was asking Bishop if we had any engineers in the house. But he said we have one civil engineer, and that was about it. But I believe that by the end of this evening, we're going to leave some spiritual engineers in this house. We're going to engineer at a level we have never engineered at before. Because we're going to understand the story of this power. So this power, at a point, decided to create smaller powers. It created smaller powers, and it placed them in a framework. Now, these smaller powers maintained some of the characteristics of the main power. And they were placed in this framework by this main power. But interestingly, along the line, something mysterious happened. There's been lots of theories, lots of explanations, lots of claims. But something mysterious happened. And these smaller powers somehow forgot the true nature of their connection to the main power. They forgot the true characteristics that they drew from the main power. And these powers began to go their own and separate ways. So along the line, this main power needed to rectify the situation. This main power created another special, smaller power that was able to bridge the gap in the separation, the gap in the confusion, the gap in the forgetfulness between itself and the smaller powers that had been in this framework. So it took this smaller power and placed it within this framework. And this smaller power was a very interesting small power because it came into this framework with a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight. This smaller power began to show the internal workings of power. It made the smaller powers understand how they were supposed to operate, how they came to be, how they connected to the main power, and indeed how the main power operated. And this was interesting because in so doing, it opened the eyes of the smaller powers in a way that had never been done before. So it became clear to a group of the smaller powers that there were lots of similarities between the way the main power operated and the way these smaller powers operated. And in both operations, the end point was the same, the release and the utilization of power. We came to realize, and it was interesting when I began to study this, because this is something I've been studying for a very long time. Because I happen to be one of the people that have this kind of questioning mind that makes me like a kamikaze. Bishop will testify, when we're young and in the Catholic Church, there were questions I would go to the Reverend Fathers and ask them that no one dared ever ask them. Because if something doesn't make sense to me, I want to understand it. And I'm not the kind of person you can just brush off with your regular kind of answers. No. Either you show me or I'll go and find out myself. And I began to realize there was a unique similarity between these powers. And in fact, there were 3 settings within which these powers worked. I realized that these smaller powers could operate on their own in an individual setting. Now, operating as an individual setting or on their own, there was a considerable amount they could achieve. It was amazing. Just on their own, the amount of achievement they could draw from the power within themselves. And it was interesting to note as well that no 2 small powers were the same. Some were technically more powerful than the others. Some technically flowed easier than the others. Some didn't flow at all. But they all maintained the same characteristics, and as individuals could actually go a very long way. Then there was a second setting where these small powers would actually get together and begin to operate in a group, in tandem. Now, when these small powers got together, this was a new level of operation. This was a new level of ability. They took things to another level that was even greater than what the individuals could do. And finally, there was a third setting where these powers, these small powers, could maintain a direct connection to the main power. Now, when that direct connection was made, we began to see things that were described as miracles. We began to see the impossible made possible. We began to see the unachievable being achieved. We began to see things happening that directly contravened a lot of systems and a lot of beliefs that existed before then. And this special power that I spoke about that had been sent from the main power was the first small power to demonstrate what a direct connection to the main power could do. And it was quite interesting. It was actually so very interesting that it got to a stage where every thinker, every philosopher among the small powers always made reference to this special power that had come from the main power. And the interesting thing is, some of them disagreed, some of them agreed, some criticized, some even questioned the existence of that small power. But in whatever they did, they could not ignore the message from this special power. So in analyzing this power, I then began to ask myself questions about the three states of power that I had observed. I realized that operating as individuals in an individual setting, these small powers were extremely, extremely capable, especially when they had learned to charge themselves. And along the line, these small powers had created certain systems of thought and given them different descriptions. And just to be very comfortable, they call them religions, they call them movements, they call them theologies and whatever. But observe that regardless what sect or belief system these powers belong to, their basic characteristic remained the same. And the interesting thing was this: once these smaller powers learned how to tap into the power within them, regardless of their setting, they achieved a lot. And I found it very interesting that along the line, some of these individual small powers tapped into their own power and became so impressive, became so significant, that at a point, other smaller powers began to think of these elevated powers as having come from the main power. But they were same as these smaller powers. It was very interesting. Then I looked at the next setting, when these powers would get together in tandem. When these smaller powers got together in tandem, it created a force like no other. It created a force so powerful, so deep, so significant, that at a point, it became necessary for the main power to intervene in a way that was completely contrary to its nature, because these small powers had got together in such a way that they were about to release something that had never been seen ever since they had been placed in this framework. These powers are interesting, aren't they? Very, very interesting powers. Now I began to look at this special power that had been sent from the main power, that had transcended this mysterious separation that no one could clearly explain. But this power, as it arrived, maintaining its connection to the main power, began to show a lot of blueprints, a lot of guidance. Now, interestingly, over the passage of time, some of these guidances got corrupted. Some of them got deviated. But within all the corruptions and the deviations, you could still identify the line of similarity. So I found myself at an interesting juncture. I gained certain insights into the operations of these powers on their own, in tandem, and tapping into the main power. I realized one thing, that these powers responded to laws, nothing else. And this is where the analogy with the car battery became very useful. Because with the battery of a car, there's only one way to get power out of it. That is, if you found a conductor, you connected it to the positive terminal and connected it to the negative terminal. That was the only way you'd get power out of these batteries. You could kick the battery. You could heat it in an oven. You could smash it with a hammer. You could do anything to it. You wouldn't get any power out of it. The only way to get power is to touch the terminals with conductors. Now, this was interesting because in an attempt to get power, a lot of things had been tried. A lot of formulas had been put together. But within all of these, the basic rule remained the same. There was only one way to get power out of this battery. The second insight I got was that what was true about the main power was also true about the small power, and that this truth was absolute. It didn't matter what setting the small power was in. It didn't matter what color the small power was. It didn't matter what association the small power had. What was true about the main power was true about the small power. In spite of all arguments and all cases to the contrary, the truth about these powers remained absolute. And then I had a third insight, that the results of these powers don't lie. You see, it's interesting. If these powers operated the right way, they got the results they were looking for. If they did not get any results, or they got a result contrary to what they were looking for. And that a way of judging how effective these powers were operating was by looking at their results. It didn't matter what philosophy they had. It didn't matter what religion they had. It didn't matter what belief system they had. The results did not lie. So there were some of these powers who had convinced themselves that a way of getting power to flow was by rolling themselves down a hill. They would roll down the hill from morning till evening, and no power would be released. Another set of these powers believed that the best way to get power to flow was by heating themselves in an oven. So they'll put themselves in the heat and heat and heat and heat and heat, and no power would be released. There were some of these powers who simply stuck to the basics, with or without advanced theologies, philosophies, everything else. They just stuck to the basics. They released such power that it was amazing. So with these three insights in mind, I decided to investigate how best to tap into individual powers, how best to tap into powers in tandem, how best to tap into the main power. And I realized that there were different degrees of these powers. Individual power could only go so far. Joint power could only go so far. But tapping into the main power was what broke all boundaries. But in order to understand the main power, I had to start by studying the individual power. And that was interesting. Because like I said from the very beginning, the individual powers were reflections of the main power. They were direct reflections. So I asked myself the question, how do we tap into individual power? Now, because of the framework within which individual powers operated, a lot of individual powers had absorbed a lot of falsehood. And some of these falsehoods had clouded the flow of their power. It had weakened the flow of their power. So even though the power was latent within them, they could still not draw on it. So I realized that one step was very important, which was charging these powers. It was equivalent of charging the car battery. When the battery is flat, it still has the ability to produce power, but it needs a charge to stimulate that internal reaction that releases the power. You see, the capability is still there. The potential is still there. It just needed to be charged. Then once it was charged, it could then be applied. And in being applied, it could then achieve outcomes that were simply miraculous. I then began to ask, How about when there's a lot of them? When you have a lot of these powers put together, when there's plenty of them, how do we tap into this joint power when there's more than one of them? I then realized that those that had succeeded at tapping into joint power had one secret. They learned to guide these small powers to focus their currents on a common goal. Once they were focused on a common goal, power was released. They as individuals could not be as powerful as the group. But once they learned how to guide the group, they could actually ride on the power of the group and achieve a lot of things that they wanted to achieve. They learned to get the individual powers to focus their currents on a common goal. And in so doing, they were able to release power even much more powerful than anything they could have done on an individual level. Now that was interesting. Then came the main power. That main power that started it all. That main power that remained all-powerful, all-present, omnipotent. What was the strategy? What was the trick? What was the formula for tapping into that main power? And I realized one thing. There was a blueprint. That special power that I mentioned earlier, it gave a blueprint. Over time, the narrative got confused. It got a bit unclear. But the basics of the blueprint remained. Somehow, the basics still remained. So to tap into the main power, the thing to do was to watch that special power and see how that special power tapped into the main power. And most importantly, what that special power said about how to tap into the main power. Am I talking to somebody? This is an interesting story. Because within this story, some of us are going to find answers. Within this story, some of us are going to walk away with deep questions. Within this story, some of us will understand certain things that have puzzled us for a long time. But this story is important for one very curious reason. I realized it doesn't matter what category the small powers were in. They could be black, they could be white, they could be yellow, they could be green, they could be tall, they could be short. The laws remained the same, the principles remained the same. And for every time that you thought there was a reason why an individual power could not operate, you came across one individual power that completely destroyed that reason. You then realized that actually the truth was absolute. Once these powers learned how to draw on their powers from within, it didn't matter what setting they were operating in. Sorry, do I need to change my microphone? Can you still hear me? Great. It didn't matter what setting they were operating in. The basic laws remained the same. So this evening, we're going to perform what is called a jump start when it comes to car batteries. You see when the car battery sometimes is flat and it can't properly start the engine? When you get another battery or another charger and you connect it to the terminals of this battery, it gives it enough power to start the engine. Now that jump start is what we're going to be looking at this evening. This evening, we're going to jump start some batteries. And in fact, this evening, we might well leave some very dangerous people in Sheffield. We might leave some very dangerous people in Sheffield. Because what the jumpstart does is that it opens the eyes of individual powers to aspects they never knew they had. Is everyone with me? I'm sure you'd have deduced by now that in my reference to the power, I'm talking about divinity and mankind. And in talking about the special power, I'm talking about no one else than the man Jesus himself. In the beginning, there was a power. Now, that power created smaller powers. And for whatever reason, the Christians have the explanation. The Muslims have the explanation. The Buddhists have the explanation. Even my own village people will give you the explanation. I remember being told when I was young that the reason why there's some inexplicable gap between us and God was that some old lady was pounding fufu, and with her dirty hand, she cleaned her dirty hand on the sky, and God got angry and went up there. So that is why there was a difference. Every setting, every society has its theory as to why there's a separation between us and divinity. But in all my searching, I find no one else that explained the gap. No one else that filled the gap so effectively like the man Jesus. As he walked among his own, he taught them things. He brought two messages, or there were two aspects to his message. The main aspect that those that later began to follow him, calling themselves, what do they even call themselves? I think they call themselves Christians. Yeah, those people, they call themselves Christians. Yeah? The main aspect that they took was the message he brought about how to return to the main power. And I think they call that they call that salvation. Yeah? And back in the day, when you are sitting in some corner thinking of conning some girl, they'll come and stand and preaching to the girl. By the time they are done, the girl's mind is all changed. You have to go and start afresh. They were walking around teaching this Lord and personal savior bullshit. You wanted to go and drink, and they'll come and tell you Lord and personal savior. They took that salvation aspect, these Christians, and were making a lot of noise about it. Interestingly, another group of people took another aspect of the message from this man Jesus. They took his principles. And in learning his principles, it was interesting that even though they were not Christians, even though they didn't even identify with him, but in applying his principles, they got the kind of results that sometimes amazed these Christians. There's a reason why some of the most successful people you come across are not Christians at all. Sometimes they are not even religious. They don't even know what religion is. They have understood principle. They have understood law, whether by accident or by design. I said at a point that not all batteries are the same. Some just come into this existence with a natural affinity. Some learn, some uncover, but for some reason, they have understood principle. And it is very interesting that when they then apply these principles and achieve some very impressive outcomes, they sometimes document these principles, and these Christians will go and buy those documents. Yet these Christians consider themselves as custodians of the message. And yet you look at them, and they are very happy. You know, they'll go and stand, back in Ghana, they'll stand in the corners of football fields and be doing their praying and shouting and singing. And they are very, 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 very happy. But whilst they are being happy, other people are being productive. Whilst they are being happy, other people are being creative. You see, because the interesting thing about this main power is that this main power is a creator. And in making these small powers, it made them in its image, and it made them creators as well. Look around you. Everything you see is a creation. This microphone I'm talking to you through, at a point, was an idea in someone's mind. Someone sat, thought, worked, and produced this microphone I'm talking to you. The TV screens, the computer, everything you use in your modern world is a creation. It started from someone's mind. Whether they be Christian, whether they be Muslim, whether they be Buddhist, whether they be atheist, the basic nature of man is that of a creator, because man originated from a creator. So I want us to look at the 3 states of power that I touched on. Man as an individual, man as a collective, and man as a recipient of divine power. And it's very interesting, right? And when I say man, obviously, you know I'm talking about male and female. Or maybe I'll begin to say women. The men are being glorified too much. But it's very interesting that in all 3 states of power, in all 3 states of operation, certain principles remain the same. Those that learned principles without the influence of religion use a particular kind of language to describe those principles. Positive thinking, affirmation. They use all these things, visualization, all these practices. And they produce some very impressive results. That the most inconvenient truth for the Christian is the assumption that because they have salvation, they know and understand how power works. They don't. In fact, there's no movement on this planet that fakes exhibition of power more than Christians. Honestly. Literally every week, you go onto social media, every week you will find narratives of people being paid to act out miracles, people being paid to act out. Oh man, there was a time not too long ago, I came across a group of people who called themselves actors for Jesus. Now, they believed that if they came to church services and they came to crusades, and then they acted like they had been healed, or they acted like something powerful had happened to them, they were helping other people build their faith. So they call themselves actors for Jesus. That's how interesting it was. In the course of my studying, I came across a very interesting, very interesting paraphrase, you know. And I still don't know who said this, but there's a lot of truth to it. You know, he said Christianity began in the Middle East as a fellowship. It got to Europe and became an institution. It got to America and became a business. It got to Africa and became a scam. That's an interesting progression, isn't it? Because somewhere in the Christians, they know that they should be able to exhibit certain power. But they are unable to do so. So to compensate, to attempt to imitate the one that was sent to them, they resort to all kinds of means. But what I want us to look at this evening is the truth, the basic, the absolute truth. And in teaching that truth, this man Jesus used what were later referred to as parables, because he was dealing with a particular kind of audience at the time. he used storylines that would make sense to that audience. And within these storylines, we find some of the basics that he tried to teach us. On one occasion, he spoke about the parable of talents. He spoke and he made it into a story about a man who was traveling and then called 3 of his servants to him. He gave one 5 talents, gave one 3, and gave one a single talent. He went on his journey, came back, and demanded an accountability from these servants. Interestingly, you observe that I said in the beginning, or somewhere earlier on, that no 2 powers are the same. Some have a larger affinity than others. But what Jesus was trying to teach was that regardless what size you've been given, regardless what size you are aware of, there's an accountability required. You're expected to produce more than you've been given. This same man, in rendering his teachings, spoke to his followers about a sower who goes out to sow. Farmer, so he goes out to plant his crop, and he just throws his seeds around like that, yeah? They're sowing like the way they used to do in those days when technology wasn't as advanced as it is now. And all the seeds he threw out fell on different types of grounds. Some bore more fruit, some barely fruited. It is interesting that the seeds were the same. The difference was the nature of the ground. What I want to communicate this evening is that regardless what setting, regardless what situation you believe and find yourself in, somewhere inside you, there is a divine power. You learn to tap into that power. You learn to release that power, and you'll be surprised at the outcomes. And I hate to shatter your illusion of supremacy as Christians, but it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not. Some of the greatest conquerors in the world, some of the greatest achievers in the world, some of the most successful people on this planet bear no recourse to Christianity or to any religion at all. But you observe them, you observe their operations, and you realize that these people follow principles. Let's talk about group power. And for that, I'll just give one interesting example. There was a time in the history of mankind when men decided to get together in unison and build a tower. In the narrative, it's referred to as the Tower of Babel. But this was interesting because all known men at the time and women got together to build this tower. The potential power that was on display was so significant that divinity had to come down and sow confusion. It was the first and only time in the narrative that divinity was known to have caused such confusion. That tells you the power of mankind in unison. That tells you the power that is released when we get together and focus on a common goal, when our currents are united on a common outcome. Within the Bible, we are told of the power of unity. Within history, we see outcomes that were achieved because people got together and focused on one goal. People got together with one mind, with one accord, with one intention. That unity took them further than anything any one of them could individually have done. And this evening, I say to you as a congregation, if we unite our powers, our prayers, our focus, our resources on the mission of the temple of grace, I can guarantee that in the next 14 years, I will not be standing on this podium. We shall be on another level. I challenge you this evening. If we focus our resources, if we focus our prayers, if we focus our mind on the goal of the temple of grace, in the next 14 years, this place will be too small to contain us. I can guarantee that. Because when we get together as a people, when we unite our focus, when we unite our resources, a power is released that is like no other. Am I talking to somebody? Talking about tapping into the divine. I don't think I need to say much more. But I want to use an example just to show how related the power of unity is to the power of the divine. You see, it's interesting. That man, Jesus, when he walked this earth, the man was of divine origin, and he understood his origin, and he understood how he had to operate. And therefore, he taught us a lot of things. If you abide in me and I abide in you, ask what you will and it shall be done to you. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can tell the mountain to move into the sea. If you do not doubt in your heart, it will. The man taught all of these things. Not only did he teach them, he demonstrated them. But I came across one interesting passage. Very interesting. This man went back to his hometown. Interestingly, when he arrived in his hometown and attempted to teach knowledge, attempted to impart knowledge, those that saw him took him at his physical appearance rather than the message he was bringing. They said, "Is this not the carpenter? Are his brothers and sisters not here with us? We know this guy. We don't need to listen to him. When did he become this teacher of miracles that he tries to say he was?" And interestingly, the narrative then tells us that Jesus was unable to perform many miracles in that town. Not because he wasn't divine, but because the people did not believe in him. You see, this is an example of unity working contrary to an objective. If the reverse of unity is so powerful that it negates the miracle power of a man like Jesus, it should tell you how powerful unity is. The narrative says he could not do many miracles in there. There were a few people that he did one-on-one healing of the sick by laying the hands on, but he could not do anything at a major level. Why? Because the hearts of the people were turned against him. If we are to see the divine power at work in this congregation, we need that unity of mind, thought, and purpose. We will release such power that we ourselves will be surprised at. Let's go on to the next slide. And like I'm saying, let's get some slides in perspective. Bishop, you should praise me. Today I've been very good. I stayed up there for how long? Usually I'm walking all over the place. Today I stayed up there for a good long time. I think I've done quite well. Yeah, I haven't done badly. Let's get into some specifics. You remember I spoke about individual power and how we charge ourselves, or how we charge the battery as individuals. There's 3 things that everyone that has ever researched this topic come up with. They talk about your thoughts, they talk about your emotions or your feelings, and then they talk about your actions. In fact, one wise philosopher, a man called Socrates, years ago, he said, "Man, know thyself, and thou shalt then understand God and the universe." You see the connection? Know thyself, and thou shalt then understand God and the universe. There's a continuum there. Truth is absolute. What is true for you at the individual level becomes true for you at the group level, becomes true for you at the universal level. There's this practice called meditation. It's mentioned often in the Bible. Meditate upon the law of the Lord. I mean, it's mentioned often. But this is a practice that works for whoever uses it, whether be you Christian or non-Christian. The ability to meditate is what differentiated Enoch from the other men of his time. There's actually a book of Enoch. I told you guys I've read a lot. There's actually a book of Enoch. And when you read that book of Enoch, you see evidence of a meditator. The interesting thing about Enoch is that he's one of the few people in scriptural narrative where we are told that he simply disappeared because God took him. That man was a mysterious man. What differentiated him was this ability, meditation. Somewhere we are told that meditate upon the law of the Lord day and night. There's a reason why that advice is given. There's a reason why that advice is given. But that focus of mind, that focus of thought, releases an innate power in you as an individual, whoever you are. It's quite interesting. Often you watch athletics events, you watch sport events, and you see prior to the events, these sportsmen are often found sitting isolated in their own corner, and they have this look of focus on their face. They have learned that meditation takes them far. Be they Christian, be they not Christian. What I want you to understand is that there are certain basic rules that work for mankind, regardless of what you want to believe. There's another practice called affirmations. And this is where a man, a woman takes a specific positive phrase, repeats it several times, so many times, that as they repeat it, they begin to believe it. And as they begin to believe it, it begins to manifest in their lives. You talk to psychologists, they use affirmations to heal and treat so many different challenges that they encounter in their practice. And in fact, some of the misguided people will try to convince you that using affirmations are a tool of the devil. And so then the question I ask them is that, what about when these affirmations are based on the gospel? Is that the devil at work as well? No. It's a basic feature in mankind. It's a basic feature in mankind. There's a practice called visualization, where people picture the outcome that they want. In the book of Habakkuk, it says, write down the vision. See, the reason for writing down the vision is that even as you're going through ups and downs, you want to focus your mind on that vision. And it tells you that what? Though it tarry, it shall surely come to pass. Though it tarry, it shall surely come to pass. What I always encourage are learnings. You see, learning is a dangerous business, right? Because it's very comfortable to just be in a position where you are just following someone Everything they say, you just follow. You don't question. You don't investigate. You don't search. It's very comfortable. Learning pulls you out of that comfort zone. Has you asking certain questions of yourself that sometimes frighten you. But without learning, there can be no progress. There simply cannot be any progress. In the early days of the gospel, the disciples of Jesus, the majority of them, the prominent ones, Peter, the Peters, the James, and Johns. Peter was a stark illiterate, we know that. Some of the others may have been educated to some extent, like Matthew being a tax collector, like Luke being into law. But there was only so far they could take the message. Then along came a Pharisee, a learned man, a man trained in doctrine, in law, in theology. That man started against the gospel, had an encounter, and became for the gospel. From the writings of this man, we have the bulk of our New Testament. It took a learned person to elevate the gospel to the level it got to. We're often told that if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. It is always worth learning. And learning is the reason why you have access to clergy. You see, for a man to sit down as a bishop, he's gone through several learnings, both practical, both theoretical. And to have access to him is an opportunity to draw down that learning in such a way that what took him 10 years will take you 2, because you are starting from the foundation he has built. Thomas Edison said, if I've been able to see farther, it is because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. Utilize the pots of skill around you. Learn. Another thing I encourage you is to set goals. One thing about goal setting is that it brings all your creativeness into focus. In my young days, there was a story, Alice in Wonderland. And this Alice in Wonderland story, I found some very interesting learnings in there. On one occasion, she encounters a cat, a Cheshire cat, that sat on an archway of a gate. And she asks the cat for directions to get to a particular place. And the cat asks her, where do you want to go? And Alice says, anywhere. The cat says, in that case, any road will take you there. You don't have a focus? Ah. Then Alice then answers with a specific direction. And this time the cat tells her that make sure that every step you take is in that direction. Having a goal focuses you. You begin to see opportunities for its achievement. You begin to see ways and means by which you can draw on your existing results and just focus on that goal. And it is for that reason that we are told things in Scripture, like if you put your hand to the plow and you turn back, you are not worthy. See, that focus of a goal. It is that focus of a goal that gave Paul the confidence to write, I have run the race. I have finished the course. You see, that focus of a goal. That focus of a goal is what made the man Jesus on the cross say, it is finished. He didn't say, I am finished. He didn't say, they are finished. What did he say? He said, it is finished. Job done. Do I need to say any more? Am I talking to somebody? Another thing I'd like to encourage you to do is to take responsibility for the outcomes in your life. And this is extremely important. One thing I find about Christians is this tendency they have to blame everything on somebody else. The devil, the auntie in the village, the old lady who sells the cocoa in the corner. It is everybody's fault except the Christian themselves. And in fact, they've bought into this narrative so long and so well that it allows people to deceive them. So you have these fraudsters standing on stage, and they'll look at you and they'll tell you that, hey, I can see that in your village, there's a little hole somewhere that somebody poured some yokogari in. 2 beans in that yokogari came from your house. Unless you come and pay consultancy, those 2 beans will become a tree, and when they become a tree, you are dead. These messages resonate with Christians because the one thing the Christians do not like to do is a simple instruction from the master. Take up your cross and follow me. He didn't say someone will take your cross up for you. No, what did he say? Take up your cross and follow me. Personal responsibility. But we like to blame everything else. Oh, the pastor didn't pray for me long enough. The anointing oil he used, he bought it from Iran. He should have bought it from Judea. The kind of excuses you hear Christians give. And they become so comfortable with excuses that they even make up more and more absolutely ridiculous ones. But then you realize that for every excuse or for every bizarre explanation the Christian has, if you take your time and you read his blueprint, the Bible, you find enough evidence there to directly contradict every excuse he's given. Yet the Christian still wants to give excuses. What more do we want? The master himself came down and showed us the way. The master himself paid the price. The master himself gave us access. What more do we want? Take what has been given to you. It has been bought with a price. You see, your value was so much that when the manufacturer decided to purchase you, it took the life of his son to purchase you. That is how much the manufacturer values you. Take what has been paid for and put it to work. Because whilst you are making your excuses, the people you refer to as the people of the world, they are working and they are getting the outcomes. Whilst you are comfortable in your excuses, they are getting the outcomes. Am I talking to somebody? How do we tap into divine power? Faith is as simple as it gets. The confidence in what we hope for, the assurance about what we do not see. It's interesting. You remember when we were talking about personal power, we spoke about thought and emotions. When we look at the biblical description of faith, we are told confidence and assurance. These are the same 2 things, just expressed differently. The focus of our thoughts on divine power, the assurance of our emotions on the release of divine power to achieve our outcomes, is what is being described as faith. It will work for anyone. Be you Christian or be you non-Christian. It will work for anyone. Jesus was on his way to heal the sick daughter of a man called Jairus. Whilst he was on his way, he got diverted. Some very smart women. These are sisters. They are trouble, I tell you. They've been trouble from the days of Jesus till now. Some very smart woman saw an opportunity and took it. You see? Responsibility. She saw the man going, and she realized, if I touch the hem of that garment, I will get my healing. In that crowd. She didn't wait for someone to open the door for her. She didn't wait for someone to pat. No. She went in there and she touched that hem. And that touch was such a unique touch that Jesus had to ask, who touched me? On his way, to deal with Jairus' daughter. This smart woman saw her chance and took it. And because of that delay, a message came and said, oh, the girl is dead. And there were lots of conversations rambling around. But Jesus said one thing to Jairus. He said, only believe. That was it. Only believe. Faith. A Roman centurion comes to Jesus, asking him to help heal his servant that is ill. Jesus says, I'll come with you and go and heal that servant. Man says, don't bother. Just say the word. Just say the word. And Jesus is so astonished. He says, not even in Judea have I found such faith. He says, just say the word. Another centurion comes. What does he say? He says, look, you see, this is where it gets so interesting about principle. You see, like I said, power responds to principle, nothing else. You see, this man said, I am a man of authority. I say to this man, go, and he goes. I say to that man, come, and he comes. So he understands that as I can command my soldiers, my troops, in the same way, this man here can command spirits. So say the word right now, that spirit will move. Faith. And we're told, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because that basic, that jumpstart, that connecting of the power terminals, faith. That is what releases divine power to work on your behalf. I want us to observe one thing. In the process of creation, like I said, we're made in the image of a creator. When it came to creating the universe, according to the biblical narrative, there was permissiveness. Let there be light. Let the firmaments form. Let there, let there, let there, let there. After all the permissiveness, after the 6 days and the 7th day of rest, there was a bigger job to be done. This time, it was, let us make man. See, unity. That unity I mentioned earlier, let us make man. In some of the texts, it says the wording was to the Elohim. Let us make man in our own image. In the image of the Creator. And you look at the history of the world, and it's been man and his creations. Some beneficial, some not so beneficial. I mean, we went to the extent where we've learned to split the atom and release certain powers that are just more powerful than anything we can even control. We've been destructive with it. We've been constructive with it. But the power is still there. The power is still there. What I want to communicate is that the power exists. It's there. The access to it is there. What we need to learn to do is how to tap into it, how to release that power. That is what makes the difference. That is what makes the difference. And when you look at, just watch the history. I was so very interested when I came across this narrative. After everything Moses had done, from the burning bush to the snakes, to the splitting of the Red Sea, to whatever, at no point did Moses even imagine doing anything extraterrestrial. But the one who had learned from him at the point said, let the sun stand still. You see what learning does? Because he learned from Moses. That confidence, arose. And like Jesus tells us, if you tell the mountain to move into the sea and you do not doubt it into your heart, that mountain will move. The man said, let the sun stand still. He took things to a level that even his master hadn't thought about. The power is there. It has always been there. The advantage we have as Christians is that we have a blueprint to follow. We have the ability to follow a blueprint and have a very direct access to divine power. That is our advantage. But I tell you that the power is not restricted to us alone. If a non-Christian follows the principles, they will get the outcomes of the power regardless. We have an advantage, but that is all we have. We do not have exclusivity. All we have is an advantage. And when it comes to the crunch, it is those that have learned principle that shall benefit from the power. I talk about belief needing to become conviction. It's interesting. When you hear things, like they say, faith cometh by hearing, you hear things, right? You begin to believe them, right? But the challenge I have with belief is that the belief can be changed. If you hear enough contrary logic, you find that your belief can be changed. But a conviction is immovable. Conviction is what made Peter, at the point of his death, the same Peter who denied Jesus because some small girl questioned him in a courtyard. That same Peter said, God forbid I die like my master. He allowed himself to be crucified upside down. That conviction, that is immovable. Belief can change. Belief is what took him into that courtyard. And in the presence of physical danger, his belief changed. But that conviction, when belief became conviction, he faced death without wavering. The way to move from belief into conviction is experience. You see, when I pray for one small thing and God does it, and I pray for something else and God does it, and I pray for something else and God does it, and I pray for something else and God does it, as I begin to experience, my belief becomes conviction. And that is why the musician tells you, count your many blessings. You name them one by one, and it will surprise you. It will surprise you. It will surprise you what the Lord has done. The other way of tapping into divine power, I'm running out of time, aren't I? The other way of running into divine power is by prayer. When it comes to prayer, there's this passage I read that just stuck with me for so long. Look, there was this powerful man of God, Elijah. This man, because he realized that the king of the nation at the time was departing from the statutes of the Lord, the man brought a famine upon the land. At a given time, the man throws a challenge between the gods that the people are now worshiping and the God that he believes in. He says, let's come to this place. Let's pull down fire from heaven. The one whose God brings down fire is the true God. Now, this is not a joke of a challenge. This is not a joke of a challenge. No. But the man pulls down the challenge, and his God shows his power. Now, at that stage, most people's faith, most people's belief would have been on the rooftop. Yeah? But then what happens? The man now attempts to reverse the very famine he's brought. What does he do? He goes into prayer. And you see, it is interesting. I just like the description of the stance he adopts. They say he goes up the mountain and he puts his head between his knees. It's interesting. I can't do that. My stomach is too big these days. But the significance of that head being between the knees is that the inside of his knees blocks his ears out. I spoke to you about focus. No disturbance. The man is focused on what he's praying for. He prays the first time. He tells his servant, go and look out there, see whether you see rain. Nothing happens. He prays again. He says, go and see whether you see rain. Nothing happens. 7 times. After the 7th time, servant comes back and says, I see something like the hand of a man. See, that is the power of prayer. Do not forget, the man had just come out of one spiritual battle. Whichever God had lost that spiritual battle was fighting against this man, even on top of that mountain. But that persistence in prayer, that focus in prayer, that dedication in prayer, it turned things upside down. And when he sends the servant out the 7th time, he says, I see a cloud as the hand of a man. Prayer works. Prayer works. There have been people who, not knowing God, who not being saved, who not having prayed in, they have called out to God in prayer and they've got results. Prayer works. The problem we have as Christians is that we sometimes think that prayer should be easy. And I tell them that Jesus himself in the Garden of Gethsemane was said to have prayed until his sweat was as blood. Mind you, that wasn't the first time Jesus had been praying. We are told regularly that he leaves the crowds and he goes to the mountain. The man had been charging his batteries repeatedly. But that day, when it came to the crunch, when it came to the critical time, it called for a different level of prayer. You see, the challenge in front of you determines the prayer you pray. That critical time, the prayer that was required was different from the prayer that was required to go and face the devil. No, that time was a different thing. And we are told he prayed until his sweat was as blood. Prayer works. You just need to learn how to apply it. And one secret I have found is the power of joint prayer. I spoke earlier about the power of unity. If there's a group of you focused on a common objective, if there's a group of you focused on a common outcome, and you focus your prayer, you'll be surprised at the miracle you see. And therein lies one of the secrets of marriage. 2 people focused on a common objective. You'll be surprised how much power you draw down. You'll be surprised how much power you draw down. Joint prayer. There's been times you be in a congregation, there's praise and worship going on, the whole level of the congregation is high. You raise your prayer, you come out of that service, you'll be surprised. What one battery can do, several batteries can do better. So when you advise not to forsake the assembly of the brethren, this is one reason. Because somewhere in there is the opening you've been looking for. Somewhere in there is the elevation you've been looking for. Somewhere in there is the gateway you've been looking for. Am I talking to somebody? I'm running out of time, but I want you to look at this. This image of tapping into the main power and the individual power. We're told that the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to them that have it. You see, wisdom is the application of knowledge. You start from knowledge, you end with wisdom. This is what I want to share. You are a replica of a powerful, unlimited creator. That is who you are. Within you lies a source of power similar to the creator. Learning to utilize this power will elevate your life. But if you learn to combine your personal power with divine power, you will open the doors to such miracles that you never imagined possible. When you charge your battery and connect it to the main battery, you release such miracles that you never thought possible. So we started with story time. Story time as it applies to a battery. But as we end this story of the batteries, the story of you begins. It's a question of what you're going to take the story and what you're going to do with it. That is for you. My job is to tell you the story. Your job is to work the story. But the story of you begins. I tell you, don't miss tomorrow. Because tomorrow we're going to another level. Don't miss tomorrow. Whatever you do, don't miss tomorrow. Because tomorrow we're going to another level. But as the story of the battery ends, the story of you begins. I close with this. Ephesians 3, verse 20. Can someone read that out for me, please? Ephesians 3, verse 20. In fact, can we all go there and read it together? This is a unity thing. We need unity. Can we start now? It says, now to him who of his what? Give it to me in the NIV. Give it to me in the NIV, please. Give it to me in the NIV. You Create people, you like these plenty brackets too much. Simple is effective. Give me that verse in the NIV. Have you got it? Good. Let's start this again. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his
Hallelujah. Shall we be on our feet? Shall we be on our feet? And as we get on